right, welcome to the Door Podcast, everyone. This is a show that discusses culture, politics, faith, everything in between. We want to help you dissect issues, ask the right questions, and walk through the door. My name is Dirk Weiss, and I'm joined here with Donovan Santa Maria. Say hello, Donovan.
Hey, how are you?
Awesome, man. Yeah, so we got second episode here, and definitely a lot of things to talk through. We just went through probably the wildest political season in my lifetime. I imagine it's similar for you. You got a couple more election cycles under your belt than me. But we thought it'd be good just to kind of go through this season, man, just what all has happened. A day or even a week in a political cycle feels like 7 years for a lot of people. A lot of things come and go. So we wanted to, just walk you through this and just remember what all has happened, where are we going, and just a lot of questions along the way. So, I was kind of remembering like the last 8 years. Like I remember as 2016 was kind of approaching, I was somewhat involved, but I knew it was pretty crazy, especially when it got down to Trump and Hillary. And then after he got elected, all of the Russia collusion and stuff that happened after that. But then we got into 2020.
How old were you
2016, then? I was, what was I? 27? Yeah.
Okay, so you'd have been old enough to have a couple elections under your belt.
Yeah. So Obama 08 was when I was 18. And then, so I voted in 08 and 12. So I had two under my belt. I think I only did the presidential elections in those years. I didn't do them in between. But since 2016, I've done the midterms as well. But yeah, 2016, pretty wild. Then we fast forward to 2020, which was exponentially more crazy. We had everything with COVID. We had the George Floyd protests and riots. We had the election lead up, and I remember we were talking then like, this is pretty wild. Like, I can't see how it could get crazier than this. And think again, and we are where we are with the Biden-Harris administration of 4 years. Take your pick on what issue you might have with it, but there was a lot that went down. So I think if we get to kind of the beginning of where I thought like this political season truly started. So beyond the primaries, because really on the Democratic side, they really set it up so that there really wasn't a primary for Biden. Now, there were primaries. He got 14 million votes in the primaries, but by and large, there really wasn't much for challengers, and he won it with a lot of
is that normal? I gotta confess, I don't really know. Like, for an incumbent, is there usually a primary?
There is. There was a primary for Republicans in leading up to 2020. I know, don't ask me to remember their names. I think there was at least 2 or 3 guys running against Trump for the Republican nomination for 2020. But it was a blowout. I don't even know if any of them got any delegates whatsoever. It was kind of more of a protest. Usually that's what it is if an incumbent is that popular or has enough momentum. It's kind of just performative for a primary.
Mm-hmm.
And then even on the Republican side in this, where you had a handful more, so you had like Ron DeSantis running, you had Nikki Haley, you had Vivek, and a couple others who were on the Republican side for primaries. But really, once Iowa happened, Iowa was the first one. Once that happened, you kind of had the idea of, this is still going to be Trump for the nomination pretty easily. He wasn't participating in debates. He was still gaining, 2/3 of polling within the party. So it was kind of a no-brainer. Like, it's going to be Trump-Biden rematch, 2020 part 2. So what I found was interesting was before the conventions, we had the first presidential debate. So typically what you have happen is after the nominations are a done deal. So the Democratic National Convention, Republican National Convention. They convene for their respective weeks during the summer, usually July. They officially say, this is our candidate. Once that happens, then they have the debates. Usually there's 3 debates that happen between, early August and mid-October. That was not the case this cycle, where you had, late June, early July, they had Trump and Biden meet for their first debate. Now, you could argue, it was kind of already a done deal. They were going to be the nominees anyways. And so let's just throw this on. Other people had other theories, especially after, but this debate in history has gone down as one of the worst performances in a presidential debate. Nothing really comes close to this. There were little moments here and there. Most of them were in Republican or Democratic nominee races. So I think with he was one of the Kennedys, the older brother. He had kind of a flub in the 1980 debates. But really, before that, you didn't have a lot. You had JFK and Nixon in the early 60s, where for that race, if you watched it, you thought JFK won. If you listened to it on the radio, you thought Nixon won, because Nixon just looked kind of sick on television. He was kind of sweaty, and that was as worse as it got. But then we have this Trump-Biden debate in late June, early July, and it was an absolute disaster for Joe Biden. Did you watch that at all, or recaps?
No, I watched it. I watched it live.
I think I was working on house projects. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was. A couple takeaways where I was surprised at Trump's composure, which was rare. But yeah, obviously it was a unanimous. I think that's what was unique about this is usually people have a debate and then one side thinks their guy won and the other side thinks their guy won, and this was nobody on the Democratic side thought Biden won.
Well, there were some paid influencers.
It was clear. Okay, yeah, nobody's always
yeah.
Shouldn't say nobody.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Well, I guess my main question on that, as looking back on it, was why was that a surprise to anyone on the left? It was kind of there was this momentum, and everybody was unified behind Biden, and then the debate happened, and then the train went off the tracks, as though they had seen something for the first time. And that, to me, was what was intriguing about that, because it wasn't a surprise to me. I don't think it was a surprise to you. But for many people, it was a sharp turning point, which means there was, it seems to me, new information. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, what do you attribute that to?
I think it's, a mix of things. I think one, a media bias. So if you isolate yourself into one camp that is so pro Democrat or pro, Biden, that by any means possible we will overlook or write off a glaring apparent issue here, which is his overall decline. And this was something that people were even saying in the run up to the election in 2020. It's the Joe Biden in 2020 is not the Joe Biden of 2012 or even 2016. You could pull up videos of speeches or debates from 2012. It's God, he was a different guy. But then to get to 2020, you were starting to see moments where he was, whether it was slurring words, looking a little bit lost, kind of a gait in his step. There were things that were, really for, I think a good amount of people as saying, hey, he is pretty old. He was, how old was he? 78, 79 when he was elected. So there's this idea of hey, this is kind of new territory. Before that, Reagan was the oldest elected president, and he kind of carried it through fairly well. This was something different, where it was where we dislike Trump so much, we're willing to overlook the fact that Joe Biden is showing signs of age at the beginning of the 2020 election and the beginning of his term. But at this point, it was unavoidable, where it was kind of a collision of all the things, really a peeling back of the veil. I think what was commonly said at that time was the emperor has no clothes. Like, it was without a doubt there was something wrong here. And what are we going to do about it? Like, is he really going to stay in the race? And I mean, that led to, the couple weeks after that with, well, what do we do with him? And they tried to do kind of a puff interview with George Stephanopoulos, and it was still a struggle where he was giving just these rough answers like, oh no, this wasn't just a one-off where he was sick or had a cold. This is like a consistent thing. And
he had a cold.
I mean, that was something that was thrown. And like, granted, I've had illnesses. Like, yeah, I probably have not been like mentally there as well. But, geez,
like, dude, he had polio. Like, it had to be real bad. Like a cold.
Yeah,
gangrene.
And it revealed not only his decline, but it revealed this media apparatus that was covering for him repeatedly for 4 years. Where unless
here's the thing. I mean, we could hang on this forever too long. Probably. I was gonna say, did the media cover for him, or did they not know as well? Were they also surprised? Like, it was probably a mix. Yep. Yeah, I mean, they were certainly covering. Yeah.
But I think if we didn't have, like, Twitter, it would be very easy to keep conveying that. Now, you can't avoid it after that debate, but throughout the entire, term, there have been this growing number of people who are like, yeah, he's not well. We're seeing these little video clips of people who are able to capture him kind of not just stumbling upstairs, but just walking on the White House lawn, just kind of lost and like mumbling kind of weird phrases in his speeches. And yeah, so all that to say,
did you see Shane Gillis's bit where he said he finishes a speech and then he turns into a Roomba? Like,
yes. And it, yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to hang too long on one point, but whatever.
Crazy debate bomb. And then, so what we had almost immediately after that, so mid-July, we had the first assassination attempt on Trump. Someone died, 2 others were injured besides Trump. And there's a lot that goes around that in terms of how the shooter was able to get where he was. He was running a drone hours prior. He had a rangefinder that he brought in, and no one, alerted, up the chain of command. No one prevented Trump from getting on stage in general. Just a lot of questions on that. And I think, with Trump being in now, I think we're going to hopefully see some answers to a lot of those questions. But all that to say is an assassination attempt is never great, whether it's the party you prefer or not. But what happens with that is, like, his momentum skyrocketed. And where you had, at that point in time, what was actually leaked, I think, this week, was that the insider polling, so you have, broad public polling like New York Times, ABC, that get, published publicly. But there's also internal polling that the candidates have. They pay a lot more money for it. They're a lot more accurate. There was internal polling for Biden's camp that Trump was going to hit or exceed 400 electoral votes at that point in time, which is, he got 312 for this election versus Harris. But to think, like, New Jersey was going to go Republican, Illinois would have gone Republican. Like, it would have been just an absolute blowout you wouldn't have seen since, like, 84 Reagan. So they knew, like, something had to be done. So what we saw at that point in time was the little switcheroo with Biden and Kamala. it almost wasn't a surprise.
Hey, one quick note on the assassination attempt. Yeah, I mean, there's tons of rabbit trails we could go down, but just the one thing I remember from that, I don't remember the name of the town where the attempt happened. Where was it? It was somewhere in
Butler,
Pennsylvania.
by Pittsburgh.
Butler. You know, Trump went back and did a second speech there. Do you remember his opening line?
As I was saying,
greatest opening line of a speech ever. I mean, I don't know if he wrote that or someone wrote that for him.
You got to say it.
Killer, man. Oh, so
took the
good.
momentum back. Yeah,
so good. Even if you're against him, you gotta celebrate that, man. That's good.
Yeah. What a comeback line.
As I was saying.
I think it was different though. I think Teddy Roosevelt, when he was shot during a speech, he actually finished the speech. So, wasn't as good as that, but still good. Yeah,
it's not bad. Yeah.
Yeah. So the switcheroo. I don't think anyone was really surprised. I don't think you were surprised that it happened. The issue, and the tension with it was, the Democratic Party had to do something to keep some possibility that they were going to win because they knew it was going to be a blowout. But at the same time, millions of dollars have already been given to the Biden-Harris campaign. And if it were to be someone else besides Kamala Harris, that money would have to be dispersed back or reimbursed back to the donors, which would be an issue of well, how do we, start a new campaign, say if it was Gavin Newsom or someone else. So again, not to spend a lot of time on it, but what was crazy and put, I think, some people at odds with the Democratic Party who normally would have voted for them was that you had this candidate change without a single vote going to that person as the primary challenger. So Joe Biden got 14 million primary votes. Kamala Harris, by association as a vice president, was included on that, but no one voted for her to be the presidential nominee. There's an alternative that they would have done an open selection at the DNC that year, which I think would have put more people at ease, but you still would have had that issue with the funding and where that was going to go if it wasn't going to be Harris. So all that to say, the switcheroo happened. And then what we saw after that was Kamala Harris, who, I've heard this say, she has been the worst or the lowest rated vice president in modern history. I was wondering, if I thought Dick Cheney was worse as he left office than she, but it must be really close.
Sure.
But regardless, very low approval rating. And then after the switch happened, for her to take the nomination, what you saw was this skyrocket in approval. Nothing that she did was different. You had really the media begin creating this narrative of success, this narrative of strength and peace and joy, and it really creating this campaign platform for her that was without question. And I think in the first 45 days, she did not do a solo interview, which if you have 100 days to run a campaign to be the president of the United States, you would, by generous thought, be doing as many interviews as possible to get your name out there, to get exposure, to do all that. So, but why don't you think she did that?
Why don't I think that? Well, I mean, that relates to a point we'll come to a little later, because the whole thing's a farce. So we'll dig into a little later when we talk about podcast world and all that. But yeah, the whole thing is just a farce. It's just marketing, and when you're lying, you think that's it. You want to hide.
Well, especially if the media is creating this persona for you, why not just let them keep doing it? If you have pundits who are always speaking greatly on your behalf, let them keep doing their thing. Why do it? But then there was an issue where the momentum was lacking. And then she finally had to do some of those interviews, and what people saw bit by bit was she's really not good on her feet. She can do a stump speech. She can do great off a script or a teleprompter, but off the cuff, it's really not there.
Well, let me say this. I agree with you. But she wasn't as bad as I thought. And this gets into like your bubbles. I mean, I like to think I'm not in too much of a bubble because I do listen to people across the spectrum. I do generally listen to more people on the right, but I listen to some centers, center left, center right, even some commies. And so I don't think I'm in the same bubble as a lot of people are. But I did expect her to do a lot worse than she did. Like, even in her debate with Trump, like, she did better than I thought. Like, because you see the clips. You see the clips of her just stammering and, you know, the importance of the passage of time and that kind of thing. And you think, oh, that it's going to be 45 minutes of that. And it's not. She was better than I thought she
overperformed.
Would be, but still not stellar.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in that debate, she overperformed, he underperformed. Yeah. I think he was hammering the drum a little bit too much on some things and just wasn't as clear.
Oh, here's the thought I had on that is that she is actually better against opposition. Because I think if you actually look at her worst clips, I think it's when she's talking to people that are for her. Because when she's when she feels opposition, she kind of locks in as a prosecutor and kind of fights. But if there's no opposition, then that's when I think she retreats into like these cliches and the repetitive kind of circles and like that's a theory. I don't know if it's true. You can go back and look at clips, but she's a fighter. Like I think fighting kind of lights her up, but then when her guard is down and you know she's just having time to fill, it's kind of when she gets onto her run-on sentences and things like that.
Born and raised in the middle class.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always just such a turnoff when they get any politician gets into those cliches. Like, don't talk to me like this is a commercial. Don't talk to me like...
Right.
Yeah. So kind of moving on, what we had kind of in that point in August, you had RFK essentially drop out of the race and endorse Trump. And to begin the formation of was this unity party of people who are, you know, disaffected Democrats or former, like Kennedy Democrats, to join in with more of the populists, with Trump and anti-establishment. And you began to see that too. Like Elon endorsed Trump after the assassination attempt. You saw eventually Tulsi Gabbard join in and endorse Trump. And then, you know, Dave Smith later on, Jimmy Dore kind of with that too, eventually Joe Rogan. You saw this kind of a unity movement of these people from different backgrounds, of different ideological perspectives kind of join in and join this momentum behind Trump and seeing like there's something greater than, you know, we like Trump. It's this anti-establishment, anti-corruption,
exactly,
anti-censorship or against the censorship, or excuse me, and seeing value in that and say if Trump is the vessel that gets us there, then we're voting for Trump. It kind of in the midst of all that too, you had assassination attempt number 2, which again was really wild. You had a guy camped out in the trees at Mar-a-Lago for 12 hours and had his rifle poking through some bushes like Looney Tunes style. Like, what is going on?
Right.
What is going on?
Yeah, I mean, that's really wild. I don't know, you know, can imagine, like if I thought, I don't think, but if I thought, hey, I want to go shoot a president, my first thought goes to, how the logistics are impossible. How do you get to anywhere near where that guy is? You know, and, I'm not a skilled assassin, so these guys, I don't think really were either, but.
Yeah, a lot of questions on it.
Yeah.
A lot of questions on it.
Yeah.
How did they get access? How were they able to camp out for so long? Yeah.
You know what's funny is that I've seen a lot of, I follow a couple like leftist type Facebook groups, and it's interesting to see the conspiracy theorists on that side come out and like, oh, there was no scar on his ear at the debate. Like, it's like, okay, so one, who's the conspiracy theorist now? Like, two, what is this conspiracy theory? They're like, there's literally dead people. Like, what I want to call them and ask them, like, what are you saying happened? There's literally people that were killed. So that was all set up, and the Secret Service was in on it. Like, it gets wild, man, because you tend to think, oh, it's the right wing that's conspiracy theorists, but like, it just shows that whenever a narrative is not going in the direction someone likes, you've got to come up with an explanation.
Yeah. Kind of going on from that, what we saw, I think it really started coming along in September for Trump, at least, was this onslaught of podcast appearances where he and JD Vance were doing their rounds on some of the biggest podcasting platforms around today. So we saw, like, both of them were on Theo Vaughn. Trump was on Nelk Boys, All In. I'm trying to remember some of the others. And it really culminated with Trump being on Joe Rogan the week before the election. And he, right. Joe had opened it up for Kamala to be on as well, but it didn't happen. There's some details that are coming out now that just seem really weird. Like, some of her staffers were offended by if that were to happen. And, they wanted Joe to travel and only do 45 minutes or an hour. Yeah, it was really interesting. But what we saw with the podcast is it's long form, hour plus. You're able to really talk to somebody at length about topics that you normally wouldn't hear from them about on some occasions. So, like for Theo Vaughn's, I think Trump talked about his brother's addiction and death, and that's why he doesn't drink. Like, I don't know, just like really insightful. It's like, oh, you never knew that about, a person. But with that was the reach, where we were able to really see side by side with, mainstream media like CNN, MSNBC, compared with the podcast views and listens. I think by the time the election hit between YouTube and Twitter, the Trump interview was at 100 million views. That's insane.
Wow.
That is insane. Like, I think you typically, like, ABC Nightly News is like 9 million. Yeah, wow. It's wild.
So what do you think that is? Why is the podcast space have so much more reach? I mean, there's many reasons, but...
Yeah, I mean, for one, it's accessible. It's accessible while you're driving, while you're doing, work around the house. You can get it on demand. So you can get it on YouTube or your podcasting platform, Spotify or Apple, like when you want to. Versus, nightly news, you better be, at the TV at 5 o'clock. This is when you want it, and it's with a personality or personalities who you can relate to, you can trust a little bit more, that talk about issues you care about, and with people who are very interesting versus, oh, good, you had a 2-minute interview on the nightly news. It's tapping into something that people have been craving for a really long time, and that what people have wanted for a long time, which was getting people in at length in deeper conversation about serious issues, or even, moments of levity where, again, like Trump's talking about his family. It's like, whether you care about that or not, it's getting into something you wouldn't typically get when he calls into, Fox and Friends in the morning.
Yeah, and I definitely think there's something to it. You're talking about accessibility. But I think if you took a CNN formatted show and, blasted it over a podcast app, it still would suck. Like, because the real thing is actual authenticity. Like, one thing that struck me as I was watching things over the last season was, seeing politicians being interviewed and, say someone would ask them something like, Americans are angry about the amount of illegal immigration. What do you say to someone like that? And the canned answer you get is always a lie, some kind of pivot. We care deeply about immigration, and Americans are right to be concerned about such issues. And I can assure you that our administration is putting all of our efforts, and that just personally offends me. Like,
blah, blah.
Like an analogy would be like someone comes to my door and knocks and says, "Hey, would you be interested in this vacuum?" And I say, "No." And then they say, "Well, what would you would like to know are some features about this vacuum?" And I'm like, "Bro, I said no. Like, are you listening? Are we having a real conversation here? Because it doesn't seem like we're having a real conversation. I'm saying things and you're not receiving them. And that's the vibe I get. Even Brett Baer, as hard as he went at Kamala, he would eventually just give up. She would spin and he would just give up. And like, if I'm on the podcast, and I would imagine maybe Joe Rogan or someone else, yeah, I get your spin. Question stands, and this interview goes nowhere else until you answer the question. How do you respond to Americans who feel this way? Like, I'm not interested in your canned response, and I think that's part of what's involved in like avoiding podcast world. Like, unless you go somewhere that's completely for you and propagandizing and just setting you up, like you're just a liar. Like, I think the podcast world, one, it has reach, and two, I think it favors authenticity. And this is what I was referring to earlier. Like, now, Trump is a liar. So here's what I want to be careful. Like, it's not like I'm saying Kamala is a liar, Trump is not a liar. Trump is a better liar. He's a better liar. And he's brave and kind of doesn't give a rip. Because he'll bull crap too. Like, Joe asks him a question, he'll rabbit trail, and Joe's trying to bring it back. But Trump kind of has like a fearlessness about him, like where he's willing to go in there and take the risk. But someone calculated, like most politicians, are not going to want to go in there and face what might potentially be an honest question where someone wants an honest answer, and they're not playing the game of, well, you spun, for 30 seconds, and now I just need to move on to the next question. Like, I just couldn't do it. Like, I asked you a question. I'm a human. Answer me. Like, this is a 3-hour podcast, and I'm going to ask this question for 3 hours until you answer me. I'm just like, I'm not living this way.
Yeah.
I'm not living this way.
If a question's asked and the first sentence or two is just rephrasing the question, you're losing me. Like, I can't, man. Like, you're not writing the college paper you're trying to get 3,000 words in, man. Like, just answer the thing. So, no, I can relate. Totally relate to that. So yeah, podcasts, I think probably one of the biggest influences on this election. And, I think what I was listening to today and yesterday, like, this is the podcast presidency. Like, I would not be surprised as we go through this next cycle, if you see members of the cabinet or Trump himself getting on podcasts again and talking through things at length. I wouldn't be surprised. It may not be as much, but I think it's still going to happen because I think they realized, oh, this actually helps us gain traction and favor with people. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. But tied in with that, what we kind of had in this last week, I mean, of course, if you're listening to this and you didn't know where you've been, Trump wins in a landslide electoral college victory and gets the popular vote, which makes it a mandate from the people that they want him to do what he says. Now, what that looks like, we'll see. We have, 60 days until inauguration. And so there's a lot of stuff going on now that, it's not even worth getting into. There's, cabinet appointees and all that. But with that, we, kind of came out on the news that Kamala had raised $1 billion and had spent over that amount. I think the figures I saw, she was about $20 million in the hole. I can't imagine spending that much money in 100 days. That's a lot of money.
Oh, I imagine it all the time. Now, I heard Crystal and Sagar today talking about she paid Oprah $1 million to endorse her, which is just crazy. Now I looked into that, and Oprah denies it, but here's where it comes down to, like, just the gaslighting and just the manipulation. Here's the quote. Oprah Winfrey was at no point during the campaign paid a personal fee.
Keywords.
Okay, like, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean by personal fee? Like, is there $1 million in your vicinity that weren't there earlier? Well, it wasn't a
Right.
personal fee. Or and it says, nor did she receive a fee from Harpo, which is her production company. Like, okay, thanks for clearing that up. Like, and I don't know if it's true or not, but certainly, oh yeah, no, I'm sure there's no one ever that's been paid for an endorsement because our politicians are
Yep.
above that. So I'm sure that's
Yep.
smoke and mirrors. Nothing
Well,
to see here.
it may not go to them personally, but a lot of them have foundations or nonprofits that they run. Like a lot, that's how a lot of that gets filtered through and gets moved around.
Yeah, I did not receive. Yes, sir. I did not receive a personal fee. I got cash. I got
Yeah.
paid. It was not a personal fee.
Yep.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. So, uh, let's see, where are we at now? So yeah, Trump wins. Republicans now have the presidency, the House, the Senate, and by and large, typically they hold the conservative majority in the Supreme Court, depending on the case. So you would think, out of all that, you know, Trump essentially is set up for success going forward, at least for the first 2 years. Now, what may be an obstacle to that, the Senate just voted Majority Leader John Thune out of South Dakota, who hasn't been the most friendly towards Trump over the years. So Mitch McConnell, the 80-some-year-old longest tenured Senate Majority Leader in history, finally stepped down from leadership. So we'll see what happens with that, because usually with Senate you have confirmations for all the cabinet appointees. But there is something that I'm learning about, which is the recess appointees, where Trump can still get cabinet members in. So we'll see what all that looks like in the next, couple months. But out of all those things, and maybe some things that we didn't cover, like, what would you say intrigued you the most?
Vance on childcare.
Do tell.
Just kidding, kind of. But man, honestly, I'm watching all this stuff and like all the crazy stuff that happened. I'm watching the vice presidential debate, and Tim Walz and J.D. Vance are talking about the child care crisis. And J.D. Vance is talking about, well, here's a quote. He says, maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area, and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. Okay. So in other words, you don't send your kids to a daycare or something. You'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes most sense. And he says, you don't get access to these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, literally, is this right-wing Republican vice presidential candidate talking about we need to federally fund childcare in various ways beyond, traditional daycares, even funding maybe granny or your neighbors. And I'm just blown away. I mean, like, is this the status of the... Now, this is my chance to, like, push back against the right, Dirk, because we're not just here to, like, bash, the Democrats and all that. But I'm literally like, is this what we're talking about? Is this the state of the conversation that, like, everything becomes a human right? Childcare now. Oh, there's a child care crisis. And I would expect that from Democrats. I would expect that from the left. And the answer I would expect from the right is, well, that's not a human right. That's not something that's up to the government to provide for you. Like, figure it out. God bless you. But, like, that's not what we're here for. And J.D. Vance is on stage with Tim Walz agreeing about how we need to improve federally funded childcare. I'm freaking blown away. That was more surprising to me than any of this, because I expect this. Now, it's all crazy, and I'll come to my real answer, but I was stunned. Are you serious, dude? This is what you talk about, the Overton window, right? The Overton window is the window of acceptable concepts or conversation, and it just keeps moving left or right, generally left, and now you've got Trump saying that abortion should go to the states. We'll come back to that, man. Yeah, because murder should go to the states, bro. That's fine. It's about the states, about states' rights, slavery, murder, abortion. That's fine. It's all about states' rights. Like, I'm getting really upset about this, but just another example of that Overton window shifting and like, what are we talking about here? So that was shocking to me. But in terms of the stuff that you listed and that were the main events of the election, I think it's just a common thread. It's the common thread, and I hate this freaking term because my kids throw it around all the time. They use the word gaslighting, and it's like that word didn't exist. I mean, I know it existed. It's a reference from some old 1950s movie, and like I know the reference, and it's been around. But now, these things become so common, and the kids are throwing them around every day, and every time you're gaslighting me. So, but that's literally what it was, and to me, this is one of the. I mean, what are the things that led to this blowout? On the right, there are a handful of things, economy, immigration, all this. But I literally think it's the gaslighting. And part of it is podcasts, social media, the disruption of the media space and its ability to control the narrative. And to be able to see through the common thread through a lot of the things that were on this list are Biden is fine. What do you mean? He's fine. Trump assassination attempt. It's a conspiracy. It didn't really happen, or it's a setup, or Biden wasn't pushed out. He stepped down as a patriot. Yeah. Oh, and Kamala's a great candidate. She's not a mess. And we're defending democracy. Yeah, we're defending democracy. Yeah, we've got to defend democracy against Donald Trump. Meanwhile, like you circumvent the democratic process to anoint your leader. Like, yeah, no, absolutely. And then the media running cover for her, even though, as you said, she was the worst candidate and vice president, like freaking ever. Nobody wanted her to be vice president, much less vice president. But now she's like the hope of the future, and all this misinformation about RFK and Tulsi. If you turn against the Democratic machine, Tulsi gets thrown under the bus. I mean, all this stuff, like Joe Rogan getting smeared, like everyone being called a racist. Like, to me, that's the common thread that runs through all of this is the freaking lies. And people, I think, to a great extent, being like, no, we're freaking done with that. Don't call me a racist. Don't call me a transphobe. Yeah, Trump is not a freaking fascist. He's an idiot, Well, he may end up being a fascist. I don't know. But it's the common thread to me is all of those things. There's just a common element, which is why at the end of the day, I wanted Trump to win. Now, not because I think he's a Christian or a conservative. We can talk a lot more about that in another podcast. He's probably in some ways conservative. And I don't think he's a good guy. But it was obvious to me that there was a coordinated attempt by this machine to stop him and those who support him. And I'm just glad that I'm against the odds.
The greatest...
So, there's my tirade.
The greatest political comeback in history. Like, there's only been one other president who hasn't served consecutive terms, like to lose and go through all that and to come back and win, bigly.
Was that Roosevelt?
No, that was Grover Cleveland.
Cleveland,
okay. 1800s. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the Madison Square Garden portion was just like, it's like, where was the line for me? It's like, this is so absurd. Where, he holds the rally at Madison Square Garden, sells it out. I'm not even talking about the Tony Hinchcliffe stuff. I'm just saying the lead up to having the rally at Madison Square Garden. And, usually what you would see on CNN, MSNBC is like, what else happened at Madison Square Garden? A Nazi rally in 1939. Or like,
right.
This is where we are right now. Like, and so.
What's crazy is that they lack the discernment to realize that the culture's moved past that. That works on a handful of people that want it to be true or are too old or disconnected to know anything else. But it's just like the tired old played card. Is this what we're doing?
Yeah. And even if, if you're listening and you're agreeing with everything that they were saying, like today, Trump goes to the White House to meet with Biden. Biden's smiling and saying, we're going to have a peaceful transfer of power, like to Hitler.
To Hitler? Exactly.
It's like somebody's lying. or somebody changed their minds at some point. Like, what are we doing? So, yeah, I hope that if, you're listening or watching and you went through all this and, for the past several years you didn't see it, I really hope that you started seeing it this cycle, because it was just so brazenly, such a brazen slap in the face to, I think, everyday people, that the media covering for politicians on either side, we say that, but my goodness, this was so absurd. That's just constantly what goes through my mind when I see this stuff come up. But maybe what I'll do here is a little bit of...
Do you know what kayfabe is?
Kayfabe.
Kayfabe.
Mm-mm.
Kayfabe. I only know this because of Eric Weinstein. Kayfabe is a term used in professional wrestling to describe the practice of portraying staged events as if they were authentic. Now, in light of what we were talking about, let me just repeat that. Kayfabe is a term used in professional wrestling, so think WWE, WWF, whatever age you are, to describe the practice of portraying staged events as if they were authentic. Mm-hmm. That, to me, has explanatory power for why Joe Biden and or Kamala Harris, insert whoever else, even on the right, can say such outlandish things about their opponent and then go to a baseball game with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll go down that rabbit trail a little more later, but another day.
Well, I want to share this just for a little bit of levity. Can you see it all right? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Pick your favorite. Top moment of the 2024 election. We have...
My top moment is Trump in the drive-thru. I love
wave.
It. Yeah.
Yeah.
The red wave.
I think in terms of humor, the wave out the drive-thru is probably my favorite. It's just memed to infinity.
Do you remember the meme I sent you where he said he was at McDonald's and he said, "This is going to be my last shift. I got my old job back."
Yep. Guy went from working McDonald's to driving a dump truck to president. A story that should inspire us all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think in terms of humor, gosh, the drive-thru is pretty crazy. It was, yeah. It's in general like a cheap political stunt, but it's just really funny. It's like, okay, he's dressing up in a McDonald's uniform and he's handing out fries. But in terms of seriousness, man, the fist pump after the assassination attempt was pretty cool. It's like, wow.
Yeah, that was good.
I remember watching the clips. I didn't watch it live, but I saw it after. Like, this is going to be a historic photo. That's going to be around forever.
Yeah.
I think, but personally, the RFK endorsement was pretty resounding for me. I think when that first happened, when he came out and he gave the speech, when RFK gave the speech to announce that he was dropping out, and he just went to town as far as, the Democratic Party pushed him aside, didn't really let him primary, didn't want anything to do with him, ran smear campaigns, tried to keep him off the ballot, and then went deep into what he wants to fight for in terms of make America healthy again. Man, who's opposed to that? And I think when he came out to that rally with Trump in Arizona, it was just like the ruckus of people are like, whoa, all these Trump voters are like going crazy for Bobby Kennedy all of a sudden. So I don't know. I think it was beginning of that unity movement of all these people from different backgrounds and have differing views on some things. They're coming together for this. So I thought it was pretty cool. So let's see. We got a little bit more time left. I think we can kind of get into some of this stuff. And I think, we're talking really the pendulum swing. Really, this election was a referendum on Biden and Harris, where essentially, and in any presidential election, even the midterms, you have a referendum on something, whether it's the sitting president or the challenger's ideas. And so, clearly people were not happy with the economy. They weren't happy with social issues and handed it over to. Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff here. I think the TikTok videos of all the screaming Harris voters who are upset that Trump won. I mean, there's going to be another round of that at the inauguration. That might be something we can get to. I mean, because that's very revealing of being wrapped up and captured by an ideology. Like your world is now falling apart. Now, people feel very seriously about some of those issues, and we'll talk to that. I mean, we brought up abortion. We'll get into that in a different episode. But as we get into this, Trump's getting inaugurated. This idea of flawed candidates, is that something that we've only had now? And so by now, I mean really 2016 on, once Trump really hit the scene, became president, we had this, president has to be morally pure, morally upright, without flaw. Why do you think that right now there's such an obsession with this attribute that the president needs to be morally pure?
Well, I'm a little older than you. I definitely wasn't plugged into politics a lot, but I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh when I was in my early 20s, and I definitely remember the attack from the right against Bill Clinton because of his behavior with Monica Lewinsky. And did he commit a crime? Did he, betray the U.S. government? Did he, release classified files that he shouldn't have? Did he commit murder? Did he, no. He had an affair with an intern. And the cry from the right was, it's immoral. So that's as far back, in Character Matters. And that's about as far back as I can remember. And I could imagine this came up with Nixon, with Watergate. I could imagine this comes up. So maybe it has a new fervor now. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's something that comes in electoral cycles. But the question stands nonetheless, which is, to what extent does this moral character impact the office, whether it be the presidency, a governor, politics? And I think to me that is the question. Like, to what extent does that matter? Like, so if I hire a guy to manage, my logistics company, and I need him to get these trucks from point A to point B in the most efficient way possible, with the most competent staff at the most profitable, rate. Like, okay, do I care actually that he is cheating on his wife? I don't know. I mean, I probably wouldn't ask. I mean, you could say it matters. Someone might say, well, sure, it matters because character, but it's not on the application. So unless he has a felony, or he got fired a bunch of times, like, it's not going to come up. You're not going to say, are you cheating on your wife? Are you mean to your kids? Like, you're not going to ask that kind of thing. Do you love your neighbors? Do you give to the homeless? Like, do you watch pornography? Like, you're not going to ask that stuff because you really just want productivity. Yep. Now the question is that a proper analogy for government, politics, a mayor, a governor, a president? That's the question on the table. I'm not prepared to give an answer. I'm just kind of regurgitating or refining the point, maybe.
Yeah, and I think a good chunk of it too is this. It's kind of treated as a dig against Trump because Trump is not a statesman by any means. He's not eloquent in his speech. He's very normal. He has the weave. He speaks off the cuff. He riffs. He can shoot from the hip, whether eloquently or not, depending on the day. But because if you had him side by side with President Obama in speeches, even like scripted speeches, like Obama is definitely the better statesman in terms of oration. But here's where it gets interesting. And I think this was a big thing for me and how I got more involved in politics, at least like learning and staying up with current events and understanding how things connect with other things, is that you have to be at an understanding that this requirement for the president to be morally pure or even a role model should not be a thing. Because the role in and of itself is not...
That's your assertion?
That is my assertion. That should not be...
Dang.
a qualifier in a sense, like a preeminent qualifier. Now, it is good to know in terms of the presidential role, because your life is under a microscope. Yeah, you don't want to, just, be abusive and, lead the country. People aren't in favor of that because you're, trying to help families and other things like that. But the idea that the president is this role model, it's a nice ideal, but it's just not a real thing. Because what happened for me was I began learning and getting into, different presidents and understanding, like, wow, all of them have a lot of, like, dark areas in their presidential runs. There's a lot of, dark, messed up stuff that happened globally, domestically, that is not a really bright spot on their legacy. So part of it was, I think I brought this up before, but I watched the documentary series, The Untold History of the United States of America. It's by Oliver Stone, who did Scarface and Platoon. Very much more of a Kennedy Democrat. He goes from, the early 1900s to Obama, every president, and goes through different things happening globally, domestically, that were dark areas on their legacies. And so a lot of things I had never even heard about, and things you're like, whoa, this is a lot more info than I ever learned in high school, definitely in history class. Because usually you look back and it's this golden era. It's like, oh, well, FDR was great, even though he was a terrible husband. But even policy-wise, you get into, like FDR, it's like, gosh, you had, Ford building vehicles for the Nazis and the Allies. Like, what? You were the president over that. Like, that is not a good thing. But say even take it more recently, like with Reagan. Like, Reagan had a poor response to the AIDS crisis and how they went about that. But one thing that always, it maybe irks me a little bit more just because it's more relevant and I've lived through it. But so you take Obama's presidency, a great statesman, a great orator. You have, at that time of him becoming president, you have two wars happening. You have Afghanistan, you have Iraq. What you have by the end of his presidency, he's adding more bombing campaigns in countries a lot of people didn't even know about. So we were doing bombing campaigns in Libya, in Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan. I would argue most Americans didn't know that, and didn't know, we're participating in these proxy wars and Congress actually didn't give approval and we're just kind of doing it. Like, this is awful. And we can talk about, running all these bombing campaigns, like, really off the cuff and quickly and really not pay attention to it. But, like, we're blowing up kids. We're blowing up families. Like, the Iraq war, like, 1 million Iraqis died. Like, there's so much weight in the decisions that, presidents make, for better or for worse. And, we can get into the lies that happened that led into the Iraq war with weapons of mass destruction. But all that to say, what I was going to get into was, in some of those bombing campaigns, that the direct target was a U.S. citizen. Like, Obama approved a bombing that killed an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki. Now,
well, that doesn't sound American.
Well, he had what was suspected ties to a terrorist organization, but nonetheless, he was an American citizen.
Yeah, right. I'm obviously kidding, but let me ask you this, because we're knocking on the door now. You're familiar with the distinction between descriptive and prescriptive. So when we're studying the Bible, there are prescriptions in which it tells us how to behave, and there are descriptions in which it tells us how humans have behaved. So the question we're posing is to what extent character matters for an elected official in whatever role. And you're given examples of weaknesses, failures, moral bankruptcies in past leaders. Does that description equal a prescription?
The ideal would be that it prescribes the following the next president to strive for better. It's simplistic, but...
You mean it's like an antithesis?
In a certain way, like every president should be standing on the shoulders of the president before him, whether that president was awful or good, by whatever standard you want to take. So I'm saying the prescription should be knowing what the presidents prior have done. The prescription should be for the incoming president to do better in the areas that have failed, but knowing as well there are going to be difficult conversations or difficult decisions that need to happen that will, regardless, result in the death of people, innocent people. So I would say the president should be moral, but the president should also have the motivation to assert, to make executive decisions in crisis with the long-term vision of overall flourishing.
Well, those things can be moral.
Yep.
So not all killing is immoral, right? So it almost sounded like you were going down the path of character doesn't matter in politics. And that's why I was asking, like, and you were giving examples of past history of, things people have done, which is true. Those are examples of their failures, like, and I don't think killing is immoral. I mean, thou shalt not murder is not that thou shalt not kill. So there's just war, there's, death penalty in the Old Testament. But I guess the question is, like, when we talk about character in politics, so I gave the example of, like, this guy. Well, I guess I do just think character matters. I think to a great extent, when you go to apply to be a CEO, they're not going to ask these questions because they're not steeped in that world. But look at the CEO's character does matter. The people interviewing him might only care about profitability and efficiency and stock prices and all that, but that's like unchecked capitalism. Like, and we go down this road on another podcast, but I think Christianity comes to bear on that and affects that and says there's more that matters than profitability, efficiency, but character. Like, okay, to what extent do you care about humans? To what extent do you care about your board? To what extent do you care about your workers? To what extent do you care about the people native to the land that you're gathering resources from? Like, I think your character matters as a CEO, and I think your character matters as a governor or a president. But I think the thing is that it's never going to be perfect. So, like in the Bible, when God calls Job a righteous man, so in the beginning of Job, he says, here's Job, he's a righteous man. God speaks to Satan and says, behold Job, he's righteous. And there's this character who is portrayed as righteous. He prays on behalf of his children. He worships the Lord. But is he a good guy? Well, relatively. I mean, at the end of the book, he repents. Mm-hmm. So he must have had something to repent for, which was his pride, his poor vision of who God was and who he is. And so he repents in sackcloth and ashes because he needs to repent. He's not righteous. He's righteous in the sense that he belongs to the Lord. And he's covered by the blood, even though he doesn't know that yet. But he's not a perfect dude. So when we choose elders, I've been an elder, certainly not perfect. You've been an elder, certainly not perfect. All your current elders and my current elders are certainly not perfect. And I think that's the model for leadership, whether it be for the church, for a company, for the government, is someone who's approximating righteousness, right? So, like, there's a good degree of tolerance here, right? Nobody's perfect, right? But I don't think we want to go to where, character doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's just a job.
And,
like,
I don't want to convey
matters.
that. I'm more so bucking against the, just because, politician A or whatever, you take Reagan or Clinton or Obama or Bush, just because they can give a good speech, like, oh, they're just such wonderful people. Like, just seeing everything with rose-colored glasses about a figure, it's like, let's not fall off the other side of the horse on that, So not to say character doesn't matter, but also not to say, gosh, these guys are saints, because they're clearly not.
Right, as compared with Trump.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. You're contrasting them with Trump, where Trump's flaws are brought out before the people.
I would almost prefer that.
Where Obama can be Yeah. Obama can tend to be whitewashed, or or Lincoln, and then we raise these people, oh, geez, think of this. Think of George Washington. What's the line, dude? What's the one line you know from George Washington?
I cannot tell a lie.
I cannot. You cannot lie. You're the Lord. It's literally Hebrews. Like we are safe in God's arms because He cannot lie. You remember that? We are saved by God's inability.
Mm.
You remember I want to write a worship song. He is unable. We're gonna, God is unable. Like. To what lie? To turn his back on his people? Like, you're right. Yeah, we whitewash all these people, but the reality is they're flawed. So again, this comes back to what we were talking about last time of like, well, nobody's perfect, so hire anybody. Yep. Or we need perfection, and when everybody's a sinner. It's like, this is where it takes wisdom and discernment to enter into that space and try to figure out, okay, Lord, help us discern who is the right leader for this moment, given their flaws, given their strengths. Character matters. Nobody's perfect. Try to balance all of that together.
Yeah, so there was like a reference to scripture that came up recently that I really hadn't thought of, and say how, if this is descriptive of our current cultural moment, but where you have, like, in the book of 2 Kings in the Bible, where you have King Jehu against the house of Ahab, where King Jehu is like a military commander, essentially gets anointed to be king, comes in, rises to power, and eliminates Ahab's influence throughout the kingdom. I mean, it's a purge. Like, it's not kicking people out. He's murdering people. Murders Jezebel, and just rids the kingdom of Ahab and his influence. And what's interesting with that, if you're familiar with scripture, so he gets rid of all the Baal worship. So it's a neighboring god from a neighboring nation that gets into Israel's culture. He gets rid of all the Baal worship, but he keeps the golden calves. And so if you know what that is, it's a reference to Exodus, where they create their god out of their gold jewelry, and it's an item of worship. So he gets rid of some of the bad stuff, a lot of the bad stuff, but he still lets some of it slide and some of it remain. And so where if you want to see that as descriptive, where you see an imperfect person coming to power and used as a vessel in a certain place and time to deal with evil, to hold back evil, to resist it, but at the same time, some still remains and is a part of the society. So to think about that as presidents come, presidents go, senators, representatives, all of that, they are being used as a vessel, for better or worse, in a given time to restrain evil. And sometimes it feels like they allow more evil than restrain it, but it is ordained by God. And in some ways, like, in the moment, you might feel like, gosh, this sucks. This isn't a fun 4 years or a fun 8 years. But to see as a whole, like, we believe that God is sovereign, that God raises up kings, sets up kings, brings kings down. And throughout all that, he still loves his people. He's bringing them to greater places of flourishing, even though the place in that specific moment in time is not. But for his people to trust and believe, like, he is doing a work that is bigger than an election. It's bigger than an election cycle, or even the history of a nation. It's not just about Rome. It's not just about the United States.
Oh, it's not about America.
Like, so we have this perspective.
Crap.
Like, we currently live in the U.S., and do I want the U.S. to flourish? Oh, of course. Like, I don't want to be living in a communist regime. Absolutely not. So like I have that perspective. Like I want America to succeed. I don't want bad things to happen, but I also know that pride comes before the fall. If
it will pass.
The U.S. will not live forever.
It will pass. Yes. Whether by the ascendance of another nation or the ascendance of the true kingdom, like this will pass.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's good. I don't know how you thought of wrapping this up, but I had a thought. I was reminded of a commentary I heard by John Piper on 1 Corinthians 7:29 through 31. And that passage reads this way. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. So we're in the end times. Christ is coming. The U.S. and Russia and China shall pass. So he says, from now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing. I mean, this is like, is this Yoda talking to you, bro? Like, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world, which is what we're talking about. So here's you and me and anyone who might listen to this, dealing with the world, engaging in politics, and it's more than that. It's buying, it's going to the market, it's having a job, it's, engaging in culture and arts and all that. Those who deal with the world, let those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. Now, he's not saying do not deal with the world. It's kind of like Jesus saying in the world, not of it. Let those who deal with the world deal as though they had no dealings with it, because the present form of this world is passing away. So this is the door. This is the doorway through. Like, we can talk about this stuff. We can analyze it. We can engage in it. But we're not to hope in it, because the present form of this world is passing away. I heard John Piper commenting on this verse when people were talking about voting and asking, like, how should Christians vote? And he said, vote as if you're not voting, right? Let those who have wives live as if they had none. Let those who mourn as though they were not mourning. Let those who vote as if they weren't voting. The point he's making is that you go into the voting booth, you cast your ballot, but it's not your hope, because the present form of this world is passing away. So do your best to discern, engage, make your decision, but don't hope in it. And that affects your degree of elation when you win and despair when you lose, right? It's a salvation for both. Because I'm glad Trump won, and I wanted him to win, and I talked about why, but you know what? We're just going to go on with life, and 4 years from now there's going to be another election, and this is going to keep going back and forth, and there'll be some victories maybe from his administration and things he does, and yeah, that's fine. But is that my hope? No. Like, it was a fun troll against the freaking left and their industrial complexes and all that, but it's not satisfying. And if you've been defeated, if you wanted Trump to lose and he won, like, it's not the end of the day. It's not the end of your life. This present form of this world is passing away. Yep. And I hope it's not here. Love that passage. I love when Paul gets on these, like, it's like, dude, are you on mescaline? What's going on? You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, it's really good insight. And a good reminder. I think, especially for, all the people screaming on TikTok, like, there's a lot that could be a part of that. But, man, if you're just really lacking hope, just know it's going to be passing, guys. And, even if, you didn't vote for Trump and despise it, it's like, you still want life to flourish. You don't want the nation to fall just because your guy isn't in, It's like, that's what I wanted, with Biden and president. I didn't vote for Biden, but I still want him to do well. I don't want, wars to break out, even though we did. I didn't want, other, unsavory things to happen. So yeah, I think that's as a reminder to not be so hooked in, but just to have our sights higher, to look to the greater thing happening that we're a part of. So yeah, I think that's a good spot to land. So yeah, any parting words?
Parting words. I work with a girl who's completely diametrically opposed to me in terms of worldview. She was raised Christian and has left that, and she's totally, from what I can tell, lefty, communist, and all that. But you know what, man? She's a delightful girl, and I understand where she's coming from because I listen to her and I listen to others, and we show up to work, and we care for each other, we honor and respect each other, and we sell floors, and I know it's not always that simple. If it comes to concentration camps and nuclear war and all that, like, okay, then, there's some things to talk about. But the reality is that's not where most of us are living. Mm-hmm. God has provided us with a fairly stable, peaceful, prosperous place, whether you're on the left or the right. Try to look for the benefit in it, the blessings in it, and be thankful and ask for him to strengthen you when those times aren't around anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome, guys. We're going to wrap it up here, but we'll have another episode coming out here sometime soon. Until next time, see ya.
Goodbye.